Welcome back. Batman Begins is a game that always stuck with me, from seeing my dad play it as a kid, to fumbling around with it myself, to finally playing through the whole game. It stuck with me enough to want to talk about it in a way which feels almost odd for a game of this calibre, but alas, here we are. This won't be a linear review of the game. There'll be a lot of flip-flopping between story points and gameplay elements and whatnot, but to begin with, Batman Begins at the beginning of the story of Batman Begins. It follows the story of Batman Begins, and the game interweaves different scenes straight from the movie, usually spliced up and edited pretty heavily into its storytelling. Which is funny, because it actually released a day before the movie did in North America, and only a day after in Europe, meaning if you were a hardcore Monster Energy sipping gamer back when this game released, you could actually spoil the whole thing for yourself before even seeing it, or in, I'm sure, some rare cases, before it was even out. I wanted to try and steer this video away from the constant comparisons to Arkham when I set out to make this video, specifically Arkham Asylum. But honestly, I think the highest praise this game could receive is that it has the same vision as Arkham Asylum in wanting to put Batman in a grounded world, and the comparisons are unavoidable. And obviously the source material for the game is extremely grounded, and the game carries that in its stride. It doesn't stray far from the movie, and similar to Arkham, the game is a Batman story at heart. It doesn't mess around with getting you straight into the cape and cowl, starting right at the opening scene, which is insanely cool by the way. And from that point on, there are 4 points where you don't play as Batman. The first being the game's tutorial, which takes place during the training Bruce does with the League of Shadows and Rashe El Gool, who I will refer to as Raz because that's how it's said in the movie. I usually go for Rashe, but just to keep in theme, we'll stick to Raz here, and no, I won't read your comments complaining about this choice. It's my video and I'll say it however I want to. Anyway, where were we? Alright, yeah, so you play as Bruce twice in the story, with the other two non-Batman levels being something we'll touch on later, but your first Bruce Man level is the second level during the tutorial section, and the second Bruce Man segment is during the portion of the game where Wayne Manor has been attacked by the League. But aside from that, you are Batman, and that's pretty cool. The Arkham series focuses on Batman, and there are very few times in the main campaigns when you switch out of that point of view, and it's for the better in those games, and that formula works here as well. Batman Begins is a film focused on showing Bruce becoming the Bat, but here, in a wonderful creative choice, we focus on Batman becoming the Batman, the one thing between the innocent and the predatory, leaving Bruce's side of it, the part which would destroy the pacing of the game if implemented, to the spliced up segments of the movies between levels. If the movie is a study of Bruce conquering his fear, the game is a study of Batman as he builds his fear factor and his aura throughout the city. But that said, even when you're not in the suit, the 2 times you're not, it still makes you feel powerful and doesn't break the power fantasy of being Batman. Despite the game including scenes from the movie though, and often using them to forward the plot, which does work, it doesn't quite work as a substitute for the movie itself, but does work in general, scenes are often used in different spots to the movie and chopped and changed to skim over different plot points where it matters. The game opens with a montage of events which happen pretty early on in the movie, and then it throws you straight into gameplay, and it carries this formula on throughout the rest of the game. It doesn't follow the exact beats of the movie though, it bridges the gap between gameplay with cut-up sections of the film, which happen at different points to where they appear in the movie, but to be honest, you get the main thing of the story. Jonathan Crane bad, Falcone bad, Ducard bad, Batman good, League of Shadows want to kill Gotham, it gets the job done. And development-wise, the devs at Eurocom had nearly unlimited access to the film's production, and thus they were able to make the game fit the feel of the movie. There's a great documentary covering the development of the game which was both invaluable for research and just to get a grasp of how closely the devs and filmmakers worked to ensure this game felt as authentic and as close to the film as possible. The original cast, Christian Bale, Sir Michael Caine, Cillian Murphy, you name them, they're all back for this game to voice their characters, aside from one giant exclusion, Sir Gary Oldman. Yeah, for whatever reason, Gary Oldman didn't reprise his role as Commissioner Gordon, and it's really jarring to have all of the original cast back apart from him, even going as far to change his looks a little bit, which I guess makes sense, and if we're honestly speaking about these A-list actors doing voiceover work, well, surprise, surprise, it's not nearly as bad as you'd think. Everyone gives a good performance, and honestly, I was half expecting to write this segment of the video, and I was going to tell you about how bad it was, and how acting and voice acting are 2 entirely different arts, But really, it's not bad. Christian Bale genuinely might sound better here than he does in the movies. The best way I can describe it is that he phones in the growl behind the voice, and it sounds really good and a lot more natural. We also have to answer the question, is Rashe El Gool immortal? Are his methods supernatural? Well, no, but Liam Neeson does so well here, like freakishly well. He smashes his performance as Ra's, and by extension Henry Ducard, and allows you to really lose yourself in his scenes because by some miracle, he is one of the standout performances in this game, which I think is both extremely cool and really ramps up the tension whenever he's on screen, because you end up buying into his shtick, which is what it's all about. The only part of the game that made me stop and go, ouch, was the final time we see Scarecrow, voiced by Cillian Murphy.
You're not human. Stay away. Don't come any closer. It's not happening. I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid.
See what I mean? It just feels a bit toned down compared to the rest of his performance in the game. It definitely isn't that bad, but it did quell the moment a little. Alas, I think overall the voice cast do their job really well, and I know that acting and voice acting are two entirely different kettles of fish, so I can't complain too much with what we hear here. Everyone seemed to buy into the idea of the game and understood the task at hand. Michael Caine, despite admitting he knew nothing about gaming, actually smashes it out of the park, but I guess that's customary for an actor of Michael Caine's calibre. He even says during the making of documentary that he wants a copy and one of the things you play it on, which means Michael Caine was an epic gamer at one point. The point I'm trying to make here is that the developers and actors both clearly had a lot of passion for this game, even if it was just for the paycheck, and it shows. The cast clearly have fun with their performances, and it adds a layer of authenticity that would only be matched 4 years later by Rocksteady. Outside of the development though, this being an original Xbox and PS2 game means it ran the risk of being quite tough by modern gaming standards. I always find when going back to older games, Max Payne specifically jumps out at me, that games were a lot less handholdy when it comes to telling you where to go and what to do. I love this, and thankfully Batman Begins follows suit. The game's tutorial section though does a really good job of quelling these worries of the game being really hard from the outset. It does take place after the opening level and teaches you a fair bit both mechanically and strategically. It really focuses in on Batman's movement and gadgets to begin with, and since I was playing this on the Xbox 360 via backwards compatibility, I did have to figure out what button was the 360's version of this little button on the original Duke, but after figuring out it was the right bumper and subsequently left bumper for different gadgets, the gadgets felt pretty good to use. They never felt particularly overpowered, and the aiming system the game implements does a huge amount to offset the typically janky camera and controls of the game, which definitely made the game harder than it probably needed to be at times. Gadgets though work similarly to the Arkham games in that they're useful in stealth, combat and exploration equally. They range from batarangs to smoke bombs and flashbang grenades, which you can find in crates throughout missions, a gadget called the HF transponder which summons a swarm of bats to your location, similar to the scene in the movie during Arkham Asylum, right through to this game's take on a hacking device, the Electro Hack, which apart from sounding like a name Spider-Man would give to Electro mid-fight, acts as this game's cryptographic sequencer in a way, although it's much more rudimentary, but it's still kind of cool. Like, you have to match up the zeros and get them all green to bypass different bits of technology, and to be fair, it was moving fast enough to the point where even in the late game, it did pose a bit of a challenge to use, which was quite fun. We also get a camera hacker which, well, hacks cameras, but only in one level, which was weird. I actually thought this gadget was pretty cool, because it could reveal like where the trigger points for different traps were, and I was a little upset when it didn't appear again after the one level it's introduced in. But then you have a lockpick, your grapnel gun, and obviously the cape to round out the gadgets. Where Arkham gives nearly every gadget multiple uses, Batman Begins gives the Batarang multiple uses and often leaves the other gadgets to their respective fields. This means you won't be using a flashbang to create a distraction or use the Electro Hack to disable shot collars or something like that. This does mean each gadget is very situational, but I don't think this is particularly something I can complain about. Arkham's implementation of gadgets is still the best in the superhero genre. They're easy to access, offer new and fun ways to tackle stealth and combat, and have a variety of uses. Take my favourite gadget, the Wreck Gun, for example. You can use it to activate generators, open doors, shock armed thugs into scaring their friends, you can use it to send armoured thugs flying, you can combine it with the special combo gadget upgrade and create a Wonder Waff-like effect. In stealth, you can use it to temporarily disable an enemy's signal jammer. It has so many useful applications that you almost take it for granted. So it isn't a shock to me that Batman Begins gadgets are much more linear, and I think in a roundabout way it kind of serves the early year Batman fantasy quite well. I don't know or even actually think this was an intended thing, but not having Batman have a ton of multi-purpose gadgets kind of felt right for this phase of his career, and I imagine if we ever got the planned Dark Knight sequel to this game, we'd have seen much more of that be implemented and showed the progression of his arsenal, from every gadget kind of having one use to a few gadgets perhaps being able to be used across multiple points, which would have been really cool to see. Heading back to the tutorial level though, and it was during this segment I had some issues with this game's camera, so after playing around with that and trying to figure out why this game doesn't understand what inverted controls are, it throws you into a small segment where you have to take out the enemies in the correct order or risk being gunned down. And I thought this was quite cool. Rather than just showing you how to take out one singular gun-toting enemy, it shows you the consequences too. Guns in this game are brutal. And I'm not talking, oh no, they shot me, I must now evade and grapple away. No, I mean guns in this game are lethal to the point of you actually having to be cautious, which is something I missed in the Arkham series. I never really felt at danger of being shot to death after Asylum due to smoke bombs and batarangs, and all of the mod cons that come with being an experienced late career Batman. But in terms of serving the early years Batman fantasy, having to be wary of guns and scope out rooms using the game's mirror gun, yes, this Batman game has a mirror gun, and no, I will not make a ready or not joke, it just works so well. It makes you think before you rush into rooms, which is something that you'll find yourself thinking about quite a lot. This won't really matter early on. There were a few occasions where having to scope out a room early on mattered, but in the mid to late game, this can genuinely save your life. Swinging open a door with even two armed thugs behind it will result in your death. And in fact, there was only once in my entire time playing the game where I managed to successfully beat two armed thugs in a straight up fistfight. And it was kind of by accident. So scoping the room out, taking another route around, and using the game's fear system, which we will touch on later, to find a way to make the situation easier, just felt so quintessentially Batman. It makes you feel smart by doing very little, which for me is what a good Batman game should do. If this stuff is second nature to Batman, it should be easy for the player. In the same way swinging is natural to Spider-Man, this sort of tactical planning is second nature to Batman. He's probably the world's greatest strategist, and so making that easy and also immersive for the player just makes sense. I said we touch on the fear system, so let's touch on the fear system. The fear system is the big immersion maker throughout, and is basically the game's big USP, with the back of the game box not letting you forget that. Although being a huge part of this game's stealth and overall gameplay loop, it really isn't used enough in my humble opinion, because it's really cool. Batman can manipulate enemies by using the environment, and this will scare thugs, making them easier to take down, which on paper is cool, and hell, it's actually pretty good in execution. And although Arkham Asylum would pretty much master the feeling of power which comes from picking off enemies and scaring them straight, Batman Begins is a lot more overt with it. It gives you two bars to look at, the area fear and reputation bars, which you do need to keep your eyes on. The reputation bar acts as the fear inducer bar. It shows you how easily Batman will strike fear into the cowardly and superstitious lot that inhabit Gotham, with the area fear bar showing you how scared the enemies are in your area. These work in tandem, and having one serve the other works really well. Trying to create the maximum amount of fear means both your current combat or stealth situation will be easier, but also means your reputation will increase, which will make the next encounter a little bit easier to gain control of, possibly before you even enter the room, which is such a badass thing to have to think about. You can just rush in and start fighting, but wouldn't it be better to throw a smoke bomb and a flashbang in and make sure the enemies at hand are vulnerable, while also making sure the next group are softened up before they even know you're coming, well, I think that's pretty cool. What I appreciate about this is the fact it gives the game another gameplay element which separates it from the Arkham series. But what I don't appreciate is the fact the fear system often boils down to a pre-rendered scene of something breaking and then the enemies, in their fear, dropping their guns, because why would you drop the gun? The gun is Batman's kryptonite in this game. The gun is always Batman's kryptonite, but specifically in this game, the gun is Batman's kryptonite. So it felt a bit weird that the fear system makes them drop it and basically just turns everything into a combat encounter. With that being said though, these pre-rendered scenes are so cool. They get more elaborate as the game goes on, starting with Batman just dropping a box on some ninjas, right through to the point he's blowing holes in walls, and my personal favourite, dropping a whale skeleton on some enemies. They're really cool visuals and I do appreciate them for what they are. My favourite part about the system, and something the Arkham games didn't do, was have enemies just surrender straight away though. The game spends a large majority of its time building Bruce up, as going from an urban legend to something of a boogeyman who thugs are terrified to realise is out there, and the gameplay serves this narrative arc so well. Seeing thugs cower in a corner or previously braggadocious enemies be reduced to shells is a power fantasy I wish we could take control of more often, because to beat the dead horse a bit more, it genuinely makes you feel like, okay, I'll spare you the overused quote, but you know what I mean, it's awesome. The fear system also allows for Batman to become something more, a true embodiment of fear, as if an enemy is scared enough they'll try and scuttle away from you, and when you grab them, Batman appears as this matte black nightmare fuel version of himself we see in the movie, and goddamn is this badass. In terms of the game showing you their fear and genuine shock when Batman, this thing they didn't even think was real, shows up, kicks their ass and holds one of them up in the air with one arm, it nails it. The first time I saw this I was actually in a party with my friend, and sadly I have no recording of this, but I genuinely said, fuck me, that is cool. Again, it's a pre-rendered scene and it's the same one every time this feature activates, but when it does, it's frigging awesome, and it really goes to show how far the developers wanted to take the fear system, and it's something I really wish we'd have seen in the Arkham series. Imagine if in Batman Arkham Knight, if an enemy was scared enough, we'd switch to their POV as the Nightmare Batman slowly marched towards them before taking them out. Obviously that's just a hypothetical, but it would have been so memorable, even if it was just a preloaded scene. You can also track each Nemesis's fear state by their heartbeat monitor in the top left corner of the screen, and this is actually a very valuable indicator which makes you do even more thinking about how you'll tackle a situation. Further serving the fantasy for me was the interrogation system. If the game requires you to find a code for a door or find something out about a criminal, it'll require you to interrogate thugs, and by god is it fun. At its core, you just press one button over and over again until you get the information you need, at which point you press another button to finish the guy off. But having a semi-interactive interrogation system does a ton in terms of putting the player in Batman's boots. Much like most gameplay elements in this game, it really goes the extra mile to increase the Batman fantasy, and the pose he strikes when he picks up a thug and begins questioning them is so recognisable and badass, to the point where it's hard not to get a little giddy when you see this for the first time. Outside of the gameplay though, I wanted to touch on the visuals of this game a little bit. So just for some transparency, I know I mentioned this earlier, but this gameplay you're watching was recorded on an Xbox 360 through backwards compatibility at 1080p 30fps. So this, aside from emulation on a PC, is the best way to look at this game. And aside from a few visual glitches where these little black bars would keep popping up on screen, so if you've seen them this video, don't worry, your laptop or phone or whatever isn't broken. This is just a really old game playing on a really old console. I was quite impressed by how this game looked though. Now, this isn't to say this game is some visual feast, but there was certainly something about it which made me appreciate the look of it. The backgrounds when you're outside look so atmospheric, and one thing that instantly made me think Arkham Asylum was the water. It kind of has this glowing look to it, and it just looks, I don't know, it just looks perfect. Gotham having glowing water just feels right. You know, like, this city might be grounded and it might be gritty and super serious and real, but also, of course, its water should be different. It needs to be different for the city to stick out. And this kind of uncanny valley look of something familiar being slightly warped, it extended to the rest of the backgrounds. They're familiar but also uniquely Gotham. During the dock section, I actually stopped to watch the city, and although it might be the most clearly 2D texture in the history of 2D textures, god damn does it look cool. It looks like what Gotham City should look like, and that's what I appreciate so much about these backgrounds. Even when dangling high above the city later on in the game, you can look down and the depth between yourself and the cars makes you feel like you're high up. It's a small thing, and by today's standards it's nothing impressive, but when we take into account this game is literally the same age as me, it stands out really well. Outside of the backgrounds though, this really isn't a bad looking game. We have to again take into account its age and the hardware it was built for, but honestly, it holds out quite well. I won't say it holds up, because of course it doesn't, but simple things like the environments and textures look pretty good and create a great atmosphere for the game, which just gives it this really unique feel. It captures the essence of the movie and its visual style really well, and every location from the docks to the Arkham, right through to the burning down Wayne Manor, every one of them carries this level of gravitas and respect for the source material, and I really respect that. It doesn't try to reinvent the wheel visually, and it makes sure to allow the game and movie to feel at one with each other, while still feeling unique enough to be recognisable as a standalone thing. The character models carry on this trend though, with the facial looks. Okay, so Bruce Wayne, that's not Bruce Wayne, but Batman? Yeah, that's Batman. Aside from that though, a couple of standouts are Liam Neeson, who they captured really well, and Lucius Fox, who got done quite nicely. This is down to the fact they used actual pictures of the actors' faces within the games, which doesn't look nearly as Leatherface as I'd have assumed. Christian Bale's forehead may gain a solid 3 centimeters, but aside from that, most of, if not all of the face scans look great, and that goes a pretty long way in my books. You know what doesn't look great though? The animations. Okay, that's harsh. Some of them look passable. The fighting animations look okay, and the cutscenes look straight up badass at times, but oh my god, this game has some of the funniest animations ever. I spoke to one of my YouTube friends who'd never played this game before, and I told him I was doing this video, and he replied with, "I've seen his ladder climb animation." The ladder climb animation has actually trended traditional Batman fan shitposting. It's amazing, and I think this was a very intentional choice. Obviously, this animation and the way Batman climbs the ladder is enough to really strike fear into the heart of any foe around, so I think this is very intentional, and obviously I'm kidding, but seriously, what is this about? Who did this? Who climbs a ladder like this? Like, why? Anyway, yeah, some of the animations in this game are really janky. The climbing animations mostly, but the weird animations also go as far as to bleed over into the running animation, which looks a little bit silly. And also, the bit of the game which me and my dad remembered the game most for prevalently for years is the sneaking animation. It just looks so goofy. Look, this isn't to undermine the general animations, but my god, some of these are funny. I don't think they're bad per se, but they definitely don't help with immersion or anything really, but I'd be doing the game a disservice if I didn't mention it. And oh, the gliding animation, yikes. Moving on to the combat, now this was a part of the game I had initially very low expectations for. After over a decade of playing the masterful Arkham free flow combat, and well, it's bad. I wasn't wrong. The combat sucks. I'm just gonna be blunt, go off script. The combat sucks. Look, now even out of the most obvious comparison to Arkham's combat, this combat isn't good. I know I've probably been influenced by some level of like Arkham brain, but just let me explain. To start with, the combat is very unpolished. It feels like they were going for a sort of lock-on, beat-em-up style thing, but unless I'm missing something painfully obvious, this is the most whiplash-inducing thing I have ever played. There were multiple times where I'd be cornered and want to fight my way out, but instead of Batman turning around and punching the enemies as I was trying to make him do, he'd just start throwing hooks at the wall and get killed, and it got pretty annoying at times. But when the animations do work and the combat does lock on to who you want it to, isn't that bad of a go at an early Batman combat system. This system is quite robust, actually. It's bad, but it's quite robust for a game that's older than most people watching this video. I don't count, I was 5 months old when this came out, so shut up. But there are definitely more options than I thought while fighting. You've got your usual punching and kicking, which are actually mapped to different buttons, which I found a little odd. But then you've got stuff like the jump attack, which was quite effective. You have a sort of dodge roll, which was definitely in the game, and then combined with the subsequent roll attack, it could actually make some pretty cool moments. There's a block button, which I used maybe like once, twice, maybe 3 times across 1.5 playthroughs, because I don't think Batman should block. He should be countering, and if I can't counter, then I will simply not protect him. But with that being said, there is actually a counter mechanic, which is possibly the most unintuitive bullshit thing ever. So, to counter a very fast move, you have to hold the right trigger to activate the block, and then stand and wait for an enemy to hit you. Now, while this is definitely achievable when you're trapped between like 5 enemies and they're all wailing on your ass like a madman, this is nearly impossible. I had to try and get a few counters for this video, and it was not fun. One thing that did stick out to me, and something I did manage to really come around to liking, and something I thought that really served the power fantasy of really fighting like Batman, were the ground attacks. Batman can actually be knocked down, and he can instantly retaliate with like a sweeping ground attack, which can serve as a way to both get up a little quicker and deal some damage to thugs who are surrounding you. It's a really small feature, but it kind of gives the combat something no other Batman game has, which is definitely something. It's up to you to decide whether it's good or bad. The combat, though, can be cool. There were definitely a few moments when I was like, wow, that's really cool, when I accidentally dodge and then perform an uppercut, or when I perform a neat jump attack and get a little makeshift combo going. But the combat really becomes a slog during this game's boss fights. There are a couple in the game, usually against the big bads, Ducard, Crane, those types of guys, and they are a chore. Not because of their toughness, no, they're actually remarkably easy, but because of how boring they are. Every boss fight is a combat encounter. Every boss fight consists of the main boss, who has a jacked up health bar, and 2 little guys protecting him. It never feels like a satisfying conclusion to the story beat it tries to tie up, due to the fact that the enemies don't fight any differently, there aren't many of them, and the fact the actual bosses don't move or fight any differently from their standard thug counterparts just makes them normal enemies who are 3 times as resilient and 10 times as button mashy to take down. As my fiance always tells me, sometimes smaller is better, and sometimes the size isn't what matters, it's how you use what you have. I'm going to keep that in. And I think this is more than applicable here. Imagine a Scarecrow fight where, although having the same amount of health as a normal thug, or even ever so slightly more, the fear gas in the room would create duplicates who aren't real like we see in the game's opening level. This would be a small change, but would challenge the player both mechanically and mentally. Or even in the final fight against Ducard or Raz or whoever he is at this point, imagine if you were just swarmed by ninjas, echoing his quote at the start about the League being able to teach Bruce how to engage 600 men and win. I don't know, I'm not saying my changes here are gospel, but the boss fights definitely fall into the camp of being a bit of a letdown when you consider the potential they could have reached with the characters they were using. I wish there was something more to mention about the combat. It definitely has a whole lot of potential, and like many things in the game, its potential was realised 4 years on. And one of the quotes I always remember about Arkham Asylum's combat was that the combat had to be easy to use for the player, because it's easy to do for Batman, and whereas Arkham Asylum went and invented an entirely new game-changing combat system to facilitate this line of thought, Batman Begins didn't do this. I'm not saying it needed to, because not every game needs to be a needle mover. Not every Batman game needs to be an Arkham Asylum. Some games just need to be a Batman Begins. And for what it is, Batman Begins combat worked well enough. It isn't hard, but equally, it isn't some Souls-like dodge roll simulator. It's kind of just mediocre and really okay. I mentioned earlier that there were 4 levels where you aren't expressly playing as Batman. Although the tutorial level and the Wayne Manor segments are fun and a change up from the norm, the Wayne Manor level in particular standing out to me as a really fun switch up from what the rest of the game presents. The other 2 sections of the game where you take control as Bruce in another scenario are both in the Tumbler. Now, the Tumbler levels are really cool, and dare I say they're more fun than driving in Arkham Knight. I know that sounds stupid, but the feeling of raw power and speed behind the wheel that you get compared to that in Night is insane. You get to reach top speeds of like 150 miles an hour, and I really didn't know why this was until I watched my cross-continent Canadian comrade, That Boy Aqua's video on the game again, in preparation for this video, and he pointed out it's because in Night you're often doing a ton of turning and drifting, and there really isn't anywhere to stretch your wings, but in this game there are so many spots for you to just hold the boost down, hit top speed, and go crazy with it, which just feels awesome. In Batman Arkham Knight, the car often feels like it can barely catch up to a normal civilian car, but in Begins, the car flies. Literally, I found out if you press B, the car jumps, which did get a laugh out of me. The game never tells you to do this, and it serves quite literally no purpose, but I did crush a car while doing it, so that was funny. The soundtrack while driving as well is so fucking groovy. Seriously, I was going to do a segment on the soundtrack, but it's honestly really forgettable. It's not bad, but it's not good either, and it definitely isn't the same as Hans Zimmer's legendary soundtrack from across the Dark Knight trilogy, and that's why, aside from the last segment on driving where I used the funky driving music, this video has been scored to Arkham's music. There's probably a way to spin that around in some sort of analytical thing about how the Arkham games are always going to hang over this game and dampen it, but honestly I'm not going to do that because I'm not smart enough and it really isn't that deep. The driving music is awesome, the rest of the music is kind of mid. Anyway, the car's power and speed definitely eclipse that of Knight's driving, but in the same respect, it doesn't feel as weighty, and if there's one take of the Batmobile that needs to feel like it has weight behind it, it's the Tumbler. It weighs 2.5 tons for crying out loud. Seriously, look it up. So for that reason alone, and the fact it looks like a giant beetle, it needs to feel like it weighs 2.5 tons. And in this game, it doesn't. But for the sole purpose of driving, crushing cars, police cars, civilian cars, ambulances, yes, Batman can wreck civilian cars and medical personnel, and it will come up on the screen to tell you there were no casualties, which is both insanely funny and also completely unbelievable, and of course, thugs alike. It works so well, and much like nearly everything in this game, it hits the nail on the head at being painfully so close to being great. The game's reviews speak to this as well. It's a solid 7 out of 10 basically across the board, and these driving sections are fun as hell and the epitome of this game's innate okayness. The driving sections being good, though, is actually somewhat of a blessing because you can actually replay them once you finish them in the story, which is really fun. It really makes this game feel like a video game. That sounds silly, but for me at least, this is as close to a Batman video game I think we've ever had, in the sense it has silly things like the replayable driving levels, you can unlock cast interviews, and there's actually 3 unlockable suits which can be used on repeat playthroughs. They're nothing special, and one of the suits is actually called the Dark Knight suit, which is funny in context to this game because it obviously doesn't resemble the suit they'd use in the film The Dark Knight 3 years later, but it's just really cool. It's a Batman video game to the nth degree, and I really appreciate the fact that it has these things, especially for a game this old. Finally, I wanted to touch on the Gallery of Fear. The Gallery of Fear is actually a pretty neat little idea that rhymed. It's a separate part of the game which acts as a gallery of sorts, where you can go and see the villains you've arrested and taken down up until the point you're at in the story in a section of Arkham Asylum from the main game. I visited this once before loading up my first save when it was empty, and once to record footage for this video when it was full, and low-key it's kind of cool. Going near an enemy's cell will raise their heartbeat and terrify them, which is a nice touch, but it also means you can learn a ton about these characters. You've got the obvious ones like Carmine Falcone and Jonathan Crane, who most people will know the story of, but even someone as prevalent as Henry Ducard, who plays a huge part in the story, has a backstory and lore surrounding him that I'm pretty sure might only be explained here. It doesn't push the boat out or change the landscape of the game, but it's awesome to have this this little location to come and see your handiwork thus far as you go through the game. I definitely recommend checking this place out in between sessions to get a grasp on who exactly you're taking down. Batman Begins has been a game which has eluded this channel for a long time. This is a video I've been wanting to make since the channel started out. As like I said in the intro, it really has stuck with me for years now as the Batman game that got away. Like, the black sheep of the Batman games I've played. It doesn't have the gameplay of perhaps the Arkham games. It doesn't have the goofiness of perhaps the Lego games. And it definitely isn't perfect. Far from it, in fact. But it's in the flaws we uncover one of the most overlooked Batman games ever. It serves the fantasy of being Batman really well. It gives you the power and the tools to exploit one of Batman's greatest tools, fear, to the nth degree. Its combat is janky, its stealth is barely even there, and its gadgets are a complete headache to use. But you know what? I love this game. I love it for trying to be something more than it was supposed to be. Much like Batman himself, it tried to become a symbol of hope. A symbol that superhero games could be more than their source material, more than the combined gameplay mechanics that make them up, and more than their contemporaries. And although it didn't set the world alight, it laid out a blueprint of passion, dedication, and mistakes that the Arkham series could build upon and take in its stride. So all in all, was Batman Begins a success? You know what? I think it was. So thank you, Batman Begins. It's not what you are, but what you did that defined you. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and goodbye.
Batman's coming. What in the name of... He's real. Batman!